The Carpathians. What do you expect to see here? Unreal nature, narrow picturesque roads, fast rivers. Yeah, I didn't forget, of course, the mountains. Pretty basic, right? But there's also one of the longest World War II defense lines in Europe here. Hundreds of firing points, 400 kilometers of trenches, Dragon's Teeth, and the largest bunker in Ukraine. But we weren't the ones who built all this. My name is Sir PEICHEV. This is the PEICHEV channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and let's discover the Carpathians from an unexpected angle. To explore the entire defensive line in the Carpathians, you need not just a few days, but months. It's called the Arpad Line, and it's almost 700 kilometers long. That's a bit less than the distance I traveled from Kiev to Zakarpattia region, where it runs. The journey took almost 10 hours. This is one of the nodes of the Arpad Line. How was it organized? Look over there, a huge mountain. It's impossible for vehicles to get through. Next, there's a river. Basically, just one stretch of road you could pass through. It was blocked by Dragon's Teeth, which started right here. Now it's clear they've been removed. The rest continues over there, on that section. Next, we have a firing position, bunkers, and a lot more firing points further down the hill. How could anyone get through such a line? Mishowski, over the past 2 years, we've been using the word bunker a lot, usually in the phrase, the bunker grandpa. So where's the largest bunker in Ukraine located? It's not in the big cities, and it's not on the current front line. It's right here, in the village of Verkhnya Hrbitnytsia in Zakarpattia. This massive concrete structure is the largest World War II-era bunker in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it wasn't built by us, nor by the Soviet Union, or even by the Germans.
See, what nice concrete they have here, right? This was done by the Hungarians. This is the Soviet Union. The doors are really modern.
The black ones, are those the Hungarians?
Yes, that's from the 1940s.
Feels more solid.
Well, look at the rebar. It's been here for 80 years and hasn't corroded at all. And this one is from 1968.
The one from 1988 hasn't held up as well.
Yeah, you see. So, shall we get into the bunker?
If we're talking about the Arpad Line, what was the Hungarians' idea behind building such a huge facility here?
According to all available sources on Hungarian history, they never built such massive structures like this anywhere else. Moreover, in 1940, after just 1 year of construction, the Hungarian Budget Commission realized that if they kept building 5 or 6 more bunkers like this in the Carpathians, the majority of Hungary's budget would go toward underground facilities in Zakarpattia. And after Lena Mazunikova's project, they started building more, having steady thousands of defensive complexes. This bunker was still being completed until the end or up to 1944, and this facility continued.
Could you please explain why such massive bunkers were being built? Was the Arpad Line built as a defensive objective, or was it meant to show off to Hitler, Stalin, or someone else?
First and foremost, it was a defensive objective, absolutely. The Arpad Line was built as a defensive system to defend and to block all the routes. Since the road that passes through our village used to be the only interregional route through the Carpathians, called Lviv-Budapest. Of course, that's why they built such a monster here. Maybe the ruler of Hungary even wanted to show off to Hitler to prove that he also had such a massive complex.
Who was Arpad, and why did he decide to build this massive defensive line? Actually, it wasn't his decision. Others decided for him. Arpad is him. He was the legendary Hungarian prince who essentially founded this state. Why are so many of you still surprised by the brotherly relationship between Russians and Hungarians? In fact, the Hungarians came from tribes that lived in the forests between the Volga and the Urals. Arpad led them to the territory of modern Hungary, conquered these lands, and that's where they still live today. And to strengthen their position, they actively married into the elite of Kievan Rus.
From the Volga to the Carpathians, these tribes were led by his father. This is the chieftain Almas. He came here to the Carpathians, but power passed to Arpad. Here, already in Zakarpattia, he was appointed as this chieftain. This is the very same chieftain who managed to unite 7 nomadic tribes here and lead them into the Danube lowlands, where the people settled down, stopped their nomadic lifestyle, even crossed the Danube, conquered that territory as well, and formed their own state. And the descendants of Arpad became the first kings of the Hungarian monarchy, who ruled this state for 1,000 years. This royal dynasty lasted for 1,000 years. This is the legend of their history. Hungary began with him. He really is the most outstanding figure in their history, in whose honor the powerful defensive system, the Arpad Line, was named. Because this Arpad was truly considered a very powerful leader.
Hungarian troops were on the side of Hitler's Germany, aggressively advancing, but they failed at Stalingrad. Even then, it became clear that the Soviet Union would occupy everything it could, so it was necessary to finish building a large defensive line. The order was given by this man, one of the key figures in the history of the Arpad Line, Miklos Horthy, regent of the Kingdom of Hungary, the top man in the country. He sided with Hitler and approved the invasion of Yugoslavia, and when everything started falling apart, he quietly tried to switch sides to the Soviets. After the defeat, Horthy was not recognized as a war criminal, even though Yugoslavia accused his army of mass killings. Horthy did not die in prison, but in Portugal at the age of 88.
Delegations went to the Maginot Line to observe and study it. How many of them were there? What did they learn? Because the Maginot Line seemed impregnable, but as history showed, things turned out differently.
After the failure of the French defensive system, when the Germans bypassed them through Belgium and captured them from the rear in 20 days, the Hungarian ruler made an agreement with Hitler to send a delegation of more than 400 people to study the Maginot Line project, engineers of various specialties, and they concluded that, indeed, in the areas where the fiercest fighting took place, the bunkers played no significant role. Where there was field defense, where there were many structures out in the open, the fighting was even fiercer, which led to the conclusion that building such fortifications was impractical. They turned out to be expensive mousetraps. But field defenses proved to be more effective. You see, they work better. Well, the Arpad Line project was also bypassed by the Soviets, so it basically met the same fate. They bypassed it. The strategy didn't work. They had to retreat from here.
If someone still hasn't heard about the Surovikin line or says that's old news, that it doesn't work anymore, then show us how to get through it. In reality, most Ukrainian soldiers admit that the enemy has the upper hand when it comes to engineering. Meanwhile, up until recently, we had built only the bare minimum of defensive structures. It's hard to compare what's being built on the front lines now with, for example, the legendary Maginot Line in France, which was constructed a little less than 100 years ago with much weaker technology. Back then, France created a monster. More than 400 kilometers of fortified concrete structures, 100 kilometers of underground tunnels, 15,000 checkpoints. And all of this is guarded by about 2,500 armored vehicles. The Maginot Line is impregnable. At least, that's what the French military strategists thought at the time. The Germans laughed and broke through it in just a few hours. I'll tell you exactly how a bit.
These days, I'm surprised by how long it often takes in Ukraine to restore small bridges or rebuild towns and villages that were under occupation. And how, 84 years ago, the Hungarians started building this. Technological progress was at a much lower level back then, but they managed to build a real underground city. A bunker 1.5 kilometers long. Right now, about 500 meters are accessible. The rest are either blocked off or still unexplored. Just to give you an idea of the scale, let me show you.
Let's go in slowly. Oops, careful, watch your head. As you can see for yourself, the tunnels in this bunker aren't very tall. At that time, the average Hungarian soldier was about 1.65 meters tall, so they built it for them. Besides that, there were all sorts of communication systems hanging here. These are cables, ventilation.
Mere 65?
Well, that was the average height of a man in the Hungarian army back then. You can walk through, you can get around using the tunnel. The tunnel is 1.15 meters wide. You can't see it, but we're actually going slightly uphill. The tunnel is built at an incline, so under our feet.
Yeah, you can kind of feel that we're going uphill.
The drainage system works. Water gets into the bunker. There's a spring, there's a well, and the water just spread out here and flows away from here.
And what did they use to dig all this?
Mostly, it was done by hand. This bunker is so big, it's hard to believe it could have been built just by hand. So, since in the 1940s there were already rocket systems, engines, and so on, they definitely had to use jackhammers and drills here. They might have even used drills during the construction of the bunker, but I can't say for sure, because there are no documented facts about that.
You said there's no documentation. Where did it go? Because there are all those classified stamps, and they get declassified over the years.
There are three theories. First of all, Budapest is probably the European city that was bombed the most by Soviet forces. The military archives there were heavily bombed by aviation. Secondly, the Soviet Union entered Budapest. Of course, the military archives could have been taken to Moscow, and they might still be kept there under the label top secret. And we have no access to the KGB or the current FSB services. And we can't rule out the possibility that this project might be somewhere in the secret archives of Hungary or Germany. Because secrecy was a must. The Hungarians hid a lot of things at this site when they retreated from here. Maybe they stashed something valuable there. So maybe that's why they're keeping it completely secret under the radar.
And have you ever asked the Hungarians, show the documents, what was here?
As far as I know, back when this bunker was still operating during the Soviet era, it was guarded by border guards from the Mukachevo zone. I know that our Ministry of Defense sent a request to the Ministry of Defense of Hungary to provide any documents about this bunker. An official response was given that such documents did not exist.
For Hungarians, this place is very popular. They come here, and there were many tourists.
The very first idea for a tourism business actually came from a Hungarian tourist. That was when I was 11, and that's how our tourism activity began. From 2012 until the coronavirus, Hungarians used to visit us quite often. After the coronavirus, it's been 4 years since we've seen a single Hungarian tourist. So, that's 2 years of the pandemic and 2 years of war. I mean, who from Hungary would want to come here now? It's just not the time for tourism in Zakarpattia to thrive for Hungarians. Well, thank God, Ukrainian tourists have also started coming to Bukovelle.
It's hard to believe, but all this was done without heavy machines. Soil was removed by hand, tons of earth. It wasn't just soil or dark soil, it was rock, including mountain rock. Hungarians did it. They extracted ore. This was incredibly hard work, and unfortunately, not everyone survived it.
The Arpad Line stretches for almost 700 kilometers.
Some researchers say it's more than 730 kilometers.
That's a lot of work to do. They use forced labor of local population.
Among others. Absolutely, everyone was forced to work. Boys from 12 to 15 years old were digging trenches, cutting wood, and hauling supplies. It was like hired labor, but they paid them next to nothing. Those who had a cart and horses could make pretty good money. You could earn a little cash there. Older boys, those of conscription age, the Carpathian Georgians considered Hungarians to be unreliable soldiers. So most of the boys weren't sent to the front. Instead, most were taken into construction battalions like that. They were sent to build the Arpad Line. This is a fact recorded in history. 70,000 people used as free slave labor, and they weren't even fed properly there.
And how were those 70,000 treated? How many of them survived that construction?
There is documented evidence that about 20,000 died doing hard labor. Those guys were fed very poorly. There are memories from people who survived, who returned from those labor battalions. But later, the Soviet army did come into the Carpathians, and many of those guys were sent further to work in their own. Some were sent to Siberia, many were taken to the front lines. So of course, very few of them made it back home alive. Out of 70,000 people, only a couple thousand made it back home, those who survived that war. There was one old man from Ishava who survived, and he said that there were no leaves on the trees or grass within a 4-kilometer radius, because, he said, they ate everything, absolutely everything, because they were so hungry.
The Hungarians had a rule not to hire any locals for the construction. They did the grunt work, and if they were captured, they wouldn't be able to reveal the bunker's layout or its weak spots. The project was kept so secret that the villagers thought until the very end that a hospital was being built here. The soldiers weren't told anything either, and in general, they had no idea what they were working on. The bunker is so long that you can actually get tired just walking through it. There are lots of turns and descents. Now we're coming up to one of them. And just look at the view here.
These tunnels, which were built by the Hungarians, were always constructed with zigzags. There are such turns, the first turn, the second turn, and then there will be a third. The turn serves an important function. First of all, it's for the safety of the bunker itself. In case of an explosion, the blast wave is dampened. Fragmentation barriers are for when a grenade is thrown or even if there's an accidental explosion in the bunker. Again, it's for the safety of the bunker. If you spot the enemy, you can hide behind the turn, pull out a machine gun, and fire. So this function.
It's like trenches.
Exactly the same. So it's the same function, yes. This is standard construction for almost all such facilities. Here's the narrowest tunnel in the bunker. This used to be the officers' barracks near the command post. Why did they make such a tunnel for the officers there? Maybe for their own safety? The room is also not a large space. Of course, it's much smaller than the soldiers' barracks ahead of us. Some people are afraid to enter this tunnel. There are people who have claustrophobia. It's really uncomfortable for them here. In tunnels like this, especially in the smallest tunnel in the bunker, a lot of people feel afraid. These are people who have claustrophobia. There are even people who can't enter the bunker at all. The fear is so strong for them.
So people came for a tour and were afraid to go in.
There have even been times when I had to call an ambulance because of a panic attack, a panic fear. People get all sorts of things into their heads. There are people who feel comfortable here, and there are people who say they used to live in a bunker. Some even asked us if they could spend the night here, at least for one night.
A bunker is a very specific kind of place. People are always looking for something mystical here. In all your years working here, have you ever experienced anything like that?
We actually ended up in this room at just the right time, because I have a really good story that happened to me here. There was a girl from Odessa who was a participant in the Battle of Psychics. She made it to the semifinals. She pushed through to the semifinals. She came to our bunker. At first, she didn't want to go into the bunker at all, but the next day she came in the morning. It was a Sunday, in the summer, the weather was beautiful, and we went into the bunker. She said she couldn't sleep the whole night. She still wanted to overcome her fear and see this place. She gave us a tour. She came with her husband. And when we entered this room, well, in the summer it's really humid here, and this room is the most humid. She drops to her knees, takes out a cross, looks at these doors, and says, "I see a soldier standing here in front of me. He's guarding these doors." And when we were walking through the bunker, she kept saying that there were always 3 or 4 soldiers following us, guarding this place. Always. What's more, towards the end, when we were about to leave this room, she suddenly started screaming really loudly. And when we finally stepped outside from the bunker, she showed us one of her fingers. That finger of hers was black. Later, we asked her, what happened? She said that one of those ghosts saw her disturbing their peace, and, as she put it, he grabbed her by the hand. He squeezed her so hard that her finger turned black. She was staying in our neighboring village. She spent 7 days here on vacation. She spent all 7 days living in the same house. I have friends there, and she said that for all 7 days her finger stayed black. It never stopped being black. She told such terrifying stories that I got goosebumps all over, and my hair stood on end. Her husband rolled up his sleeve, looked at me, and said his hair was standing on end too. After the tour, my guides didn't want to go into the bunker for 3 days, until we brought a priest here. And every year we try to do this, to sprinkle this bunker with holy water, so that nothing mystical happens to us here. So, that's how it is here.
Did you really see a person's finger turn black?
Yes, it turned completely black. The whole nail turned black like this. The finger was black.
I just don't really believe in mystical stuff. But the thing is, when you're in a place like this, you can start to get in your own head about it. When you're here alone, you come here alone pretty often, right?
Yes, of course. What?
Does someone follow you?
For the first 3 years of my time in the bunker, almost every time I went in, I constantly had the feeling that someone was following me. Over time, I got used to it, of course, and now I feel like a fish in water here, so I don't experience those strange feelings anymore. Although, it can still be different. Sometimes, something still gets stuck in your head.
Well, have you ever actually seen anyone or not?
I only saw something like that once. For about 2 seconds, I saw the silhouette of a soldier. He was in the neighboring passageway. By the way, that was also a really strange day. It was the 31st of November. That's a memorial day for us in Western Ukraine, a day when people go to the cemetery and light candles. And also, by the way, this was in 2017. After that, people who claimed to be psychics came to me as well. They said that on this particular day, even an ordinary person could see things like that. I think I saw it, but I wasn't scared. I was just so shocked that it actually made me laugh a little. I saw a silhouette and turned to look at it. Well, it was a silhouette. I really did see the silhouette of a soldier, but after 2 or 3 seconds it started to fade away, and that was it. So yeah, shock, laughter, and that's all.
This place really has a very, very intense energy. When you walk through these corridors, it feels like someone is always watching you. And the people who are near these doors, they've seen ghosts. So, did I add a bit of mystique? We're giving this segment to STB. Honestly, I don't really believe in the supernatural, but when you're in a huge bunker 50 meters underground, it's dark, there's barely any light, it's loud. You can literally do this and hear it echo throughout the whole bunker. Your imagination can really start to fill in the blanks.
Behind you, no ghosts, just living people. Heinrich, I understand, commanded this line.
That's right. Because of the Hungarian government's lack of trust, and since Miklos Horthy was negotiating with Stalin, in 1944 Hitler appointed Heinrich as the commander-in-chief over the Hungarian troops.
Gotthard Heinrich, a renowned German military commander. The Nazis nicknamed him our poisonous gnome, and admitted that he was probably the most talented master of defensive warfare. His father was a priest, his wife was half Jewish. But that didn't stop Heinrich from receiving the Iron Cross in World War I and 10 more awards from Nazi Germany. He was one of those who broke through the Maginot Line. And when the Soviet troops launched a counteroffensive, he tried to persuade Hitler to preserve Army Group Center, to pull the forces back to prepare positions, and to wear down the enemy's potential. Hitler didn't like that, and he removed Heinrich from his position as commander. He later deeply regretted it. The Red Army carried out Operation Bagration, encircled the Nazis, and essentially destroyed the Army Group Center. Just as Heinrich had predicted, Hitler once again asks for his help. He skillfully organizes the defense, and the Nazis retreat beyond the Carpathians with minimal losses. Here, the Arpad Line comes in handy, the defense of which was commanded by Heinrich.
His army held the defense along all the borders of our Carpathians, including in the Tatras and also in Transylvania. They were all subordinate to Horthy and Heinrich. The ruler of the Hungarian state is the same person who governed the country, the one who financed the construction project of the Arpad Line. He was like a monarch, a person who held the position of king. Yes. Well, the defense here was held by the troops of Bela Miklos Delnoki. By the way, this is the same general who entered into negotiations. He was also the one who signed the capitulation. Pay attention to how it is written here. In 44 to 45, well, for less than a year, he was the prime minister of the later pro-Soviet government. So it wasn't just by chance, these were agreements, and the position was already waiting for him in the Soviet sphere. And 3 years later, he was found at home in Budapest with a bullet in his head. In fact, this general shot himself. At least, that's what we know from this story. This is a general who was awarded the Black Cross, a Hungarian general, with the Black Cross distinction, the highest honor from Hitler that existed.
He switched sides, made a peace agreement, joined the Soviet army, because they understood there was no chance left. Or was there still any chance back then?
Hitler, knowing that he was negotiating with Stalin, didn't trust him, and realizing that Horthy could leave the war at any moment, well, Hitler took major precautions. First of all, he kidnapped his youngest son.
Operation Panzerfaust. How did it happen?
It was a special operation carried out by Hitler's most formidable saboteur, Otto Skorzeny.
Operation Panzerfaust sounds a lot like another James Bond movie plot, but it actually happened. Hitler found out that the Hungarian leader Horthy wanted to surrender and was secretly negotiating with the Soviets. Hitler decided to strip him of power and kidnap Horthy's son, who had already made contact with the Soviets. They lured him in under the pretense of negotiations, but at the last moment he sensed danger and didn't show up. However, there was a second attempt, and it was much more successful. There, Horthy's son is beaten, wrapped in a carpet, and sent to a German concentration camp. His father quickly advocates power to save him from death. He was the one who carried out Nazi Germany's most difficult operations, including Panzerfaust. Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's chief saboteur. His most famous operation is Oak. In the year 43, a coup took place in Italy. The country was tired of defeats and needed to somehow get out of the war. The elite conspired and arrested Mussolini. Then Hitler gave the command to Skorzeny. He, along with a group of paratroopers, landed in the Italian mountains, seized the cable car station that led directly to the hotel where Mussolini was being held. This operation was so audacious and so unexpected that resistance was practically minimal. The very next day, Mussolini was flown to Germany. Skorzeny also commanded Operation Greif, a personal idea of Hitler's. The essence of it was to select nearly 3,000 Germans who spoke English, dress them in American uniforms, give them American equipment, and create real chaos among enemy troops. Out of the 3,000 saboteurs planned, only 160 actually spoke perfect English. At first, the operation went more or less smoothly, but then the Americans started to suspect something. Besides the language barrier, another huge problem was the lack of American equipment. There was a critical shortage of it, so Skorzeny had to stage a masquerade. German tanks were modified to make them look like American ones. Skorzeny was given nowhere near the amount of equipment he had requested, so later he recalled with skepticism. Only a young, inexperienced Yank in the dark from a great distance could mistake our tanks for American ones. They managed to sow panic, but eventually the operation was called off because the Americans became much more vigilant. They started coming up with passwords and questions that only a fellow countryman could answer. Skorzeny had wild and grand ideas. For example, Operation Long Jump, where at the Tehran conference he planned to assassinate Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt. But Soviet intelligence found out about everything, and the plan failed. After the war, Skorzeny started cooperating with the Americans, and basically, he managed to avoid punishment. Then, according to many sources, he even ended up working for Mossad, even though he had taken part in Jewish pogroms.
Then Horthy was summoned to Berlin, and a coup took place. He was forced to sign a decree stating that he himself. He was, let's say, arrested by Hitler, and in his place, a staunch Hitler supporter, General Zalassi, was installed, who then took command of the army. But at that time, the Hungarian army was splitting apart. It was exactly during this period. That is, some generals supported the idea of leaving the war and fighting on the side of the Soviet troops, just like the King of Romania did. And this general even convinced 5 other generals to switch sides and fight for the Soviets. Why didn't he get the position of prime minister? But most of the generals still followed Zalassi, and so Hungary remained Hitler's only ally who couldn't manage to betray him. They wanted to, but they couldn't. That's why Hungary was carved up quite a bit. In other words, only 36% of the country remained. But, you see, he still didn't live long on his own terms. 3 years later, he ended his life by suicide.
So how did it happen that they built a line into which they poured unreal resources? And yet, as history shows, such lines are easily bypassed. Was it simply bypassed? Or was there some kind of political betrayal involved? Because there are a lot of minor versions like that, which differ from each other.
Look, Miklos Horthy, when he was building the defense line project, was already sending telegrams to Hitler in 1943. In the telegram, the meaning was defined as follows, and it was deciphered by Soviet troops: "I have built a gate through the Carpathians that no army in the world can pass through." The second part of this phrase, "I locked the gate and hid the key in the Tisa River." What does that mean? So far, no historian can tell you. Yes, but he was so confident in the Arpad Line project that he believed no one would ever get through it. It didn't work out. They went around it. Just like the French defensive system, and like other defensive systems, they were bypassed. Yes, the Arpad Line did not fulfill its strategic purpose. They built a strong project, invested billions of US dollars into this construction. But there was no purpose or strategy, because if the defensive line was bypassed, the Soviet army would completely encircle the area. And the Hungarians, of course, realized they were about to be surrounded, so they started to retreat from here.
Did they bypass the line through Romania?
Through Romania.
How did that happen?
There was also betrayal involved. Hitler was betrayed by the King of Romania, who declared capitulation at the end of the summer of 1944, and the Soviet army was simply let through. The Soviet troops didn't even have any plans to storm the Carpathians. So, knowing about these fortifications, the intelligence did its job, and we told the commanders of the Soviet troops that the Carpathians were impassable. Thousands of structures were built in the mountains. The Soviet troops were supposed to go through the southern Carpathians, through southern Transylvania, but the King of Romania announces capitulation. He lets the Soviet army pass through northern Transylvania. 2 Ukrainian fronts bypassed the Carpathian ridges. And of course, heading toward Budapest, if the Soviet army breaks through, the Hungarians understood perfectly well they had to go defend Budapest. That's one thing, and secondly, they were getting encircled anyway. So, naturally, they had to retreat.
Any fortress can be taken. Defensive lines are designed to buy time and slow down the enemy. I've already told you about the legendary Maginot Line. It had just a few flaws, which the Germans exploited perfectly. The line was built based on the experience of trench warfare from World War I. Instead, the Germans set up smoke screens, deployed mobile assault engineer squads that approached closely, and planted explosives. Bunkers were just as easily destroyed by aerial bombs. The structures failed as crash tests. But worst of all, the line was unsuitable for all-around defense. If someone broke through from the rear or the flank, you ended up trapped. and someone did break through. The Maginot Line was almost perfect, except for this section on the border with Belgium. The latter declared their neutrality, so they had to quickly build up the defensive wall in difficult, swampy terrain. It wasn't as well made as the rest of the wall. How were other famous defensive lines breached, for example, the largest one in the world? It was called the Stalin Line, stretching 1,850 kilometers. Of course, the Soviet Union was obsessed with gigantism at the time and wanted to be first here as well. However, the line itself was much weaker than the Maginot Line. There was a significantly lower concentration of defensive structures. The Stalin Line is a name that was invented by the foreign press, especially the German press. In the Soviet Union, no one called it that, especially after the Germans captured the line. The Stalin Line partially fulfilled its purpose and slowed down the fascist advance in certain regions, for example, in Kiev. The Siegfried Line, 630 kilometers that protected Hitler from invasion from the west. The first to test this wall were supposed to be France and Britain, who declared war on Germany after Hitler attacked Poland. In reality, the Poles were simply abandoned because the Allies had a huge advantage in troop numbers, 110 divisions against 33. The Germans were occupied on the Eastern Front, but the Allies chose passive waiting and only small, local skirmishes. This period in history was called the Phony War. The Allied forces were in such a hurry, in quotes, to save Poland that the French government created an entertainment service within the armed forces. They discussed giving soldiers extra alcohol, removing the tax on playing cards, and bought 10,000 soccer balls. Back then, just like now, Europeans didn't want to provoke the enemy into escalating. That's why Hitler calmly took over Poland, gathered his troops, and defeated the French. At that point, there was no time for cards or soccer anymore. Hitler remembered the Siegfried Line in 1944, when the Anglo-American forces were at the doorstep. 20,000 workers were sent to restore the outdated defensive structures. Among them were a lot of miners, since there was already a critical shortage of manpower. It took more than half a year to take the line. The losses on the Allied side alone exceeded 240,000 men. The Mannerheim Line in Finland is one of the most successful defensive lines in history. Even back then, walling off from the works was already in fashion. The line is not continuous, nor as powerful as the previous ones. For example, they used less concrete than was used for the Opera House in Helsinki. Among the reasons for success were the fighting spirit of the Finns, the terrain, the weather, and significant miscalculations by the Soviet commanders who also planned to take something there in 3 days. The line was breached thanks to sheer manpower and enormous losses, with both countries engaging in propaganda. The Finns praised the line to boost their own morale. Meanwhile, the Soviet troops did the opposite to cover up their blatant miscalculations and poor preparation.
Please tell us about this little room. What do we have here?
Well, the first and smallest room we're showing today is the command post. This was also where the telephone and radio hub was located. Commanders absolutely had to have communications close at hand. We set up a small museum in this room. Most of the finds here were discovered in our mountains. Or sometimes local residents bring something when they're out picking mushrooms or berries. Of course, many of the items, most of them, actually, were brought to us by black diggers. They do excavations, of course, and even though this activity is illegal here in the Carpathians, it still happens, because the guys here aren't looking for coins. They want to find the caches that the Hungarians left behind. You have to understand, too, the army was retreating here. The Hungarians didn't leave much behind when they fled from here. They didn't abandon much, but they buried a lot. Those are the secrets the black diggers want to find. They were really into excavating. I'll put it this way. Before the war, for about 20 years, this whole thing was such a craze that our Carpathians actually got pretty well cleaned out. The Carpathians were disarmed, and the Carpathians became much safer, way safer. I remember my childhood, when we used to walk here in the mountains, running around the hills, going to the forest for mushrooms and berries. Things like that, about 30 years ago, happened pretty often. You could find them. Personally, I found a lot of magazines from the Madsen machine gun. The Madsen was used by Hungarian soldiers. It weighed 9 kilograms, but it was their personal weapon, their service weapon. So, of course, when they were retreating from here, most of the guys took theirs with them. But as for the ammunition sets, the Hungarians left a lot behind. A box with a set of ammunition would hold 5 of those magazines. 40 rounds in one magazine, that's at least 8 kilograms. Of course, as the soldiers were fleeing, they left a lot behind, so people even found these rounds in boxes like that. The most common find for the local population is a mortar shell.
and that's actually the caliber they find the most. Well, between the Hungarian, Soviet, and German ones, the difference is just a couple tenths of a millimeter. But here in the Carpathians, you see, the Hungarians left a lot behind, so we find things. I used to find, sometimes, 5 or 6 Hungarian mortar shells at a time. And the Soviet ones, of course, were usually found one at a time, the ones that hadn't exploded. That was our childhood. Often, we'd build a fire outside the village, burn car tires, and throw them right into the fire. We'd set them off ourselves. Most often, we did this before Easter, on Easter Sunday. We had this tradition. You had to blow something up, shoot something. Of course, after games like that, there were fatal accidents in some villages, even in our generation. Pretty much every village ended up with people who became disabled. Even now, our local people still find things like that. Thank God, it's rare now, but in this village, I don't know a single teenager who is familiar with that. There aren't even any teenagers here who have ever found those kinds of shells. That's why, because those things were so popular, we call them piranhas.
Artillery, which Stoda made a lot of for the Hungarians, the production of a modern vehicle. This is light artillery, 37mm caliber. There's even a little Skoda logo marked right on the shell casing's primer. Just an ordinary flashlight. Almost all German soldiers, including the Hungarians, carried these cases or little pouches. Hitler made sure every soldier carried a gas mask case, since a gas mask had saved his life in World War I when he was young and fighting in France. If he hadn't had a gas mask, since chemical artillery was used heavily there, his life would have ended. That's why he issued an order for all soldiers, up to 11 of them, to have one. They were provided with gas mask cases, and of course, they also carried first aid kits, medicines, and medical alcohol, always. They found ampoules of adrenaline, salamandrin, and nicotine acid was very common. Some of these drugs made the soldiers fearless.
Could you tell us more about that? That's interesting. Is it kind of like drugs, right?
Well, of course it is. Very often, the Germans used things like that, just like in the Soviet army. There, they used more opium and other similar substances. And even now, in modern times, this kind of thing still happens quite often. And here are the Edelweiss boots. But if you see a boot like this from the Mountain Infantry Assault Brigade of the Edelweiss Division, not everyone had boots like these. These were only for the elite of the German Mountain Infantry Divisions, the Edelweiss. They had exactly these kinds of caps, like mine. See? Here's the Edelweiss flower. That was their insignia. Only a guy who completed training in an altitude of 3,500 meters could earn the flower. Yes, these were very well-trained guys, both mentally and physically. Not everyone among us can even breathe at an altitude of 3,500 meters. Well, again, they were sent to fight in our Carpathians and in Crimea, but these were assault troops only for special operations. Very few of them fought here, because these were German garrisons. As you can imagine, here in the Carpathians, the Hungarians held the flanks.
Edelweiss is a plant that can be found high up in the mountains. During World War II, you could also encounter another Edelweiss there, the Mountain Infantry Division of the Wehrmacht, the elite of the German army. Soldiers recruited there had to be at least 24 years old and have combat experience in cold climates. These were highly trained troops equipped with the most advanced weapons and gear of the time. They took part in a large number of successful operations in many countries. At the same time, they were responsible for numerous crimes against the civilian population.
When the Hungarian army was retreating from our Carpathians, of course, they blew up many of their firing positions. But those firing points that weren't destroyed, this is a fact, recorded in history, they chained a condemned man to them. Each of those condemned men knew perfectly well that he would not be taken prisoner by the Soviet army. Especially a machine gun sniper, they tried not to take them alive. And even more so, after Voronezh, where the Hungarians were encircled, Stalin gave the order to shoot them on sight. So, our guys found in one of the bunkers, which, by the way, was really well camouflaged, so most likely even the Soviet troops didn't blow it up later, these kinds of shackles, where soldiers' legs were chained. The soldier had a bit of provisions, some water, a certain set of ammunition, and he knew he had to hold the defense to the very end. These were the kinds of soldiers who had done something wrong. Why had they done something wrong? There was a lot of desertion, and those were the ones considered doomed. Let me remind you, the army was retreating from here. They were extremely demoralized. And even more so when the Hungarian counteroffensive began. There were 3 days of non-stop bombardment of the area.
It was at these very firing points that the Hungarians chained up the doomed men. After the positions were captured by Soviet forces, most of the defensive structures were destroyed.
This firing position was completely destroyed. Now let me show you what it looks like inside. And inside, everything looks like this. There was a very powerful explosion from above, and cracks spread throughout the entire room. It's still safe to be here because only the plaster is cracked, and the concrete itself is this thick. I don't know if it can even be penetrated. They say this bunker can withstand any strike, even a nuclear one.
We'll get back to the bunker, but for now, let's change locations for a bit. In the morning, we're heading to the village of Kalakava.
It's actually really beautiful here. The scenery is picturesque, and places like this really stand out against it. This is a DOT, a long-term firing point. There used to be a lot of them scattered all over the Carpathians. Different numbers are mentioned. Some say there were 700, others say around 1,000. The line isn't continuous. Again, it's made up of separate firing positions. This isn't some kind of Chinese wall, not a separate barrier, because they realize that lines like the Maginot Line, for example, aren't very effective. It's dark in here. Turn on the light. Let's check what's inside. Again, it's made for people who aren't very tall. A few concrete chambers, all flooded with water. Humidity. Whoa, there are some huge spiders on the wall. Here's another room. Doesn't smell very good. Everything is incredibly small. There's even ventilation in there. These are the conditions Hungarian soldiers had to live in. I guess this bunker wasn't blown up. We've climbed just about 30 meters, and I'm liking it more and more. Here we have another firing position. It looks beautiful. From here, you can see another road. Well, it might be a lot more interesting inside here. Let's proceed to go inside. The principle is more or less the same. But there's a lot more space. These kinds of firing points were basically scattered throughout all the Carpathian forests. In reality, it's all very simple, just an ordinary concrete box. The concrete here is much thinner than it was in the largest bunker in Verkhny Hrbitnytsia. There's a small window. It has a beautiful view from it. And there's also a small door, a waterfall nature. It didn't seem like there was any sign of war here, but fighting did take place. You constantly have to climb higher and higher. This line rises high into the mountains. Honestly, I have no idea how you can avoid falling here, let alone try to fight. 14 concrete firing points, and even these tiny machine gun nests. I'm not even counting how many there are. Somehow, a person was sitting right here.
There are significantly fewer artifacts left from the presence of Hungarian troops because of the activities of illegal archaeologists. But just a few kilometers away, there's a very interesting place that, despite the non-touristy weather, someone agreed to show me.
Here's another one of the few bunkers where at least something has survived. There are a lot of items here that were found right in these places. For example, here's a Hungarian helmet with a bullet hole. Moving on, there's a lot of different weapons, a machine gun. Some of the exhibits are Soviet, and there are some that were made in Germany. You can easily get caught on something here, just like I did. Honestly, walking around here was extremely uncomfortable.
It's interesting to learn a bit about the Hungarians. I've heard they were quite cruel, and the local population didn't like them. How were they generally regarded?
The Hungarian authorities were not liked in the Carpathians. The harsh behavior of the Hungarian gendarmerie, or as they were sometimes called, the Peredniki. They used to wear those whips on their belts, yes. They were cruel. Even Hungarian soldiers were afraid of them. Very strict strict laws, curfew. Well, of course, young guys and girls would break that curfew. There were dances, weddings were held, even with Hungarian soldiers. But the Hungarian authorities treated the local population badly. They forced children to work for a pittance. Yes, older boys were taken into the army. They recruited for the labor battalion as free slave labor. So, all the more, it was possible to accept this government after the Czechoslovak government. That was the previous government. Until 1930, we were part of the Czechoslovak Republic.
And how was it under them?
Some historians write 20 golden years in that century. In that century, our people lived through 20 golden years.
They didn't like the Hungarian government. And how did people feel about the Soviet government?
As for the Soviet government, nobody here knew anything about it. I mean, people had heard about it, about socialism, about a social future. But we were here in Hungary. Western Ukraine already knew what Soviet rule was like since the 30s, right? And why did the Ukrainian insurgent army start fighting against the Soviet army in 1943? They just didn't want. Nobody wanted the return of that same government. That's right, and that's why the Ukrainian insurgent army cooperated with the German and Hungarian troops. But here, on the contrary, propaganda for socialism started, the promise of a social future. And that's why some guys went to fight against the Soviet troops. In the mountain regions where we are, the UPA didn't really gain much ground. That's right. For example, I have the case of my brother-in-law. He was born here. Unfortunately, he also passed away. He died from a certain virus. His father, having horses, in 1944 hitched up a horse-drawn wagon and said, "We're going to see what socialism is like." A lot of people went to see that socialism, and they never came back. So people thought, it must be nice there, that's why they don't return. A social future, social equality, yes. And he too, in 1944, went there to see for himself. Somewhere at the border, a border guard stopped him and asked, "Where are you going?" "Oh, I'm just going to see what socialism looks like." So he told him, "Don't be foolish, you'd better go back home." But the guy just told him off. "Well," he said, "go on then, keep going." In 1954, after Siberia, the family returned home.
We're descending to the deepest part of this bunker, 55 meters down. And if you listen closely, there's definitely some kind of river down there. Okay, I exaggerated about the river, of course, but there is this little stream. It's drinking water, crystal clear. You can drink it, but you don't really want to. And honestly, the acoustics have changed so much. I'm talking here, but it feels like there are other people at the far end of the room. I hope there aren't any.
I know this bunker has its own secrets. Some of them are marked with a question mark. What do they mean?
There's not just one mystery like that. There are several. The walls aren't Hungarian. This was built during the Soviet era by KGB structures. They scanned it with an echolocator, and it shows that there's a tunnel going straight for 25 meters. And I can hardly say anything more. There could be a turn, as you can see there, or maybe a fork, or maybe another concrete wall. The Hungarian story itself says that they also hid a lot in the bunker because they couldn't take anything out of here. And there wasn't much they could bury in the bunker either. According to their story, there should be another half a kilometer. We don't have access there right now. 11 years ago, when we started our work clearing out this bunker, the guys spent 4 months cleaning up this place and doing a bit of cosmetic repairs. Well, let's put it this way. Both the head of the village council, since this facility is currently on the village council's books, and our entrepreneur who rented the bunker, they were all warned by our services. Guys, business is business. We're working here, but God forbid anyone sticks their nose past the walls of this bunker.
I think a lot of viewers will have this question. Why hasn't anyone broken through this wall yet?
Because they were given a warning. Personally, I like the theory about the gold of the Third Reich or the loot from the Soviet era that the Hungarians took out just like the Germans did. They could hide a lot of things in the Carpathians because once they entered the Carpathians, they couldn't take anything out. No matter how curious we are to break down that wall, we're not going to take responsibility for doing it ourselves. And we still haven't found any powerful investors who would have the means to do it. For 11 years, I've been telling tourists that the Third Reich's gold is hidden there. Yeah,
And do you actually believe that could be true?
it easily could be. Where do you think they took all the loot? Well, the Germans were taking it out by train, with whole convoys. The Hungarians blew up the high-gauge bridges, so nothing could be taken out by rail anymore. Only this road was left. This was the only inter-road route through the Carpathians. If, for example, it's still hard for you to believe, well, back in the day, every village here had a narrow-gauge railway, so the train used to come right up to the bunker here. It could get in here, but it couldn't take anything out anymore, because the Romanians allowed passage through Transylvania. Of course, there are a lot of legends in the Carpathians that many things were hidden here in the mountains. Was it in this bunker, or maybe in other places? Well, anything is possible. But the local guys went into the bunker after the war. Some young teenagers who weren't in the village when the war ended, they were all staying over the pass, and when they found out it was possible to return to the village, this was after the Feast of the Intercession, well, one old man, who also passed away recently during the coronavirus period, he died at 93. And he said that he was 15 years old when he saw the bunker. Right after the war, curiosity drew him to the bunker like a magnet. At the entrance to the bunker, and when we went inside, there were Soviet soldiers standing there, and he said they let us into the bunker. And the old man said, we were happy. We found a lot of things here. It was the first time we saw the bunker. When he was telling us this story, for example, he remembered very clearly the shelves, the racks where the weapons were kept. He remembers that area. There was no blue sky. There were boxes of cartridges. Ammunition was left behind. He also said that we didn't go far, because we ended up here after the war with nothing, barefoot, hungry, and with only the clothes on our backs. Clothes are interesting, Grandpa is interested, and here, even more so, there are crates of that canned meat, field rations, bagels, all sorts of canned goods. In small bottles, Grandpa recalled, there were brown-colored alcoholic drinks. He even remembered that it was less than a chikashka, about 200 milliliters. It was a kind of cognac. Well, he was 93 years old and had an incredible memory. And 11 years ago, he used to drive around the bunker. He remembered all of this. He recalled medical alcohol. They found a lot of that medicine in the barracks, in the hospital, and in the barracks there were clothes, uniforms, shoes, and a warm quilted jacket. Grandpa says, we saw warm Hungarian clothes, a warm quilted jacket. So, what do you think we did? We put them on right away. Shoes. You know how it used to be in big families back in the day. You'd grab a pair of boots for yourself and another pair under your arm. We stuffed our pockets and even our sleeves with canned meat, bottles, rations, everything we could grab. All packed up nicely, we head out to the street, and Grandpa started telling a story. And two fools, he says, have just enough sense to grab weapons out of pure nonsense. Now imagine if the Soviet soldiers who let them in saw that.
The little Hungarians show up.
With weapons in their hands. Well, Grandpa was 15 years old. I wouldn't say that's so little. He was taller than me, this Grandpa of ours. And it was the Soviet soldier who saw the Hungarian soldier with a weapon in his hands. That's how they met. One of them, without thinking twice, loaded his machine gun and shouted, hands up. Grandpa says, I couldn't raise my hands. They were stuffed with canned meat. All right, he says, grabs the weapon and tells the other two to throw away their weapons. And he says, thank God, another soldier managed to run up to that Bashkir and knock the machine guns out of their hands. After that, they unpacked us. Everything we carried out of that bunker, they made us eat and drink all of it. They kept us there for about an hour, making us try all of it. And by the way, he remembers that hour very well, because he says he had never seen anything like it in his life. When that same Bashkir took off his overcoat, he said he counted 8 watches on one arm and almost as many on the other. He kept looking at those watches, and for a whole hour he didn't let us out of his sight, not even for a step. They checked to make sure nothing had been taken from the bunker, and only then, he said, did they let us go home. He told us, when we were heading home, that's when I realized that we didn't just end up in the bunker by chance. We were on a reconnaissance mission. They sent us in right after the Hungarians to check out the place. Mines, tripwires, and so on. But for the work they did, the guys really did the job. They carried out an operation called Trust, but Verify. Let me remind you that it was the political negotiations that ended the war in this region, right? And the local guys checked the bunker. No one got blown up and no one got poisoned. Everyone brought home a reward, a quilted jacket, boots that we wore. He said no one even bothered to take them off us anymore, a string of bagels, a can of stew, and, he said, he even brought a chocolate bar home. And he said he came home happy, joyful, and realized he made it back alive, not empty-handed either. At least there was some kind of reward.
So basically, they were checking the bunker for mines using kids.
Yeah, just like that, little ones. And by the way, thanks to this memory, at least we know something. We know what was here. We know what was there in those areas. There are at least 25 meters of tunnel straight ahead over there. We know what these rooms were used for. We know well what it was like here in the 80s and 90s because we, the locals, were in the bunker. Many of us took out all the utilities from here. The beds were taken out, all the armored doors that were here. Rails, floors, cables, ventilation, all of that.
Well, how did they cope? Access and anyone could go in and get something.
And when it was written off to the village council's balance sheet, what could the village council chairman do? By the way, he was prosecuted for failing to preserve the bunker's valuables. Yes, it was attributed to him. But what could he do? It was a business. Business was booming. They took out everything they could. The locals got access to the bunker, the border guards handed it over, and people took out whatever they could. Whatever they didn't manage to take was later cut out with blowtorches. Everything was destroyed. The last doors that were stolen from the bunker were in 2010. They were at the entrance. In 2010, the last doors were taken from here.
We can see the signed hospital right now. When this bunker was being built, the local population was basically lied to. They were told that it wasn't a defensive shelter, but that a huge hospital was going to be built here. Let's be careful now, because we've already been here before. There's a guest waiting for us here. If you don't know about it, it can really scare you. He doesn't really have anything to do with the museum, but it seems to us that he's the reason why ambulances were sometimes called here, and why some people thought they saw ghosts. When you turn the corner, knowing that no one should be here, and you see him, your blood runs cold. You have an arrow here, a hospital. And did they often tell the locals that it was a hospital being built?
Well, in our village, 5 years of our lives went by with construction during the building of this bunker. We had soldiers walking around the village here. They even played at weddings. Of course, you had to tell the curious locals something. What was going on here in this village? And the Hungarians came and said, they were building an underground military, a military hospital, or a military infirmary, as they themselves called it. So, the hospital part is actually true. The Hungarians did build it. Moreover, I'll tell you this, aside from that function, this facility never served any other purpose. They used it as a hospital for at least a couple of days. We had 2 weeks of trips through the mountains. They brought the wounded and the sick here, so it did serve its purpose as a hospital. Many psychics who come here say that this place, this very area, has a very negative energy. Well, whatever the case, there was a 2-week war in the mountains region. 100% people died here in this hospital.
Many rooms are disrepair. For example, the exit to the upper DOT. There used to be some kind of ladder here, but now it's just a hazardous spot like this. You can't climb up here because it's dangerous, and tourists aren't allowed in this area. Right now, we're in the barracks. Up to 500 soldiers could live here at the same time. It's a very long room, kind of like a small subway line. And just listen to this sound. The echo is incredible.
Right now, this room is the largest one that was set aside in the bunker. Moreover, all the experts believe that the storage areas were the largest spaces in this facility. Well, the scale of this room tells us some information. We calculated that if you line up 50 beds in a row, because you can't fit any more than that here, and these beds were stacked 3 tiers high, which is known because the locals also tipped them out of here, then, you see, that's 150 sleeping places. There are 150 soldiers resting in the barracks. One shift rests in the bunker, another shift operates the bunker. A lot of experts told us that this facility had to have a third shift, since it also needed to be guarded. So, for the garrison, we counted 450 soldiers. We add 30 officers to this battalion. 40 medical staff, no more will fit in this room. So, for the garrison, we have over 500 people. That's how it could have been here. But I'm telling you again, it was never actually like that here. Why? Because we had to retreat. The Hungarian army abandoned all the fortifications, every single one, including this site as well. Later, realizing that they needed to defend themselves because the Fourth Front had launched an offensive, right? Up in the mountains, they left a group of soldiers to fight, snipers, machine gunners, artillerymen, demolitionists, and those same suicide troops who were chained up. The medical staff stayed behind in the bunker, but it never served a defensive purpose, not even for a single day. This fortress never fulfilled its military purpose. Why? Because the Soviet army never stormed the highway. And as I already said, neither the strategy nor the bunker, nor even the Arpad Line really worked out, but they did achieve a huge psychological effect, a psychological function. And so, we have 430 meters of developed territory here. There are almost 900 meters of the entire territory with access to these firing points, or as I say, just under a kilometer. And according to Hungarian historical records, not just data, but historical accounts about this bunker, it is said that it should be 1.5 kilometers. Right in the center of this room, there is also a question mark. Some people say that there could have been an exit from the barracks leading further beyond the mountain, just like in many other facilities, and such projects were indeed made. Because this project is not, like some bicycle manufacturer or something like that. This is a finished fortification, like the Maginot Line, the Mannerheim Line, or German defensive complexes. 1 entrance, 4, 5, 6 exits from the bunker. That's it. And one of them absolutely has to be secret, known only to the officer corps and no one else. Are we planning to explore the bunker? By the way, some guys from Ukrainian counterintelligence came to us. They had ground-penetrating radars, echo sounders. They scanned the area. But right now, they don't have time to come and investigate this site.
Honestly, this video showed me that Ukraine is full of awesome tourist spots that hardly anyone knows about. I came here with completely different expectations. I thought this bunker was much smaller and not that interesting, but in reality, you could spend hours here. So I definitely invite you to come here. This place is unreal.